So welcome to this evening's program, Sex for Pay, Work or Pray. I am Debbie Wiedinghoff, President of National Council of Jewish Women, Chicago North Shore section. Thank you for joining our webinar. Please note that everyone should put themselves on mute to minimize any feedback noise. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat, and Kathy probably will open it up for a question or two when she feels the need anyways. JCAST, the Jewish Community Against Sex Trafficking, founded in 2013, is a program of NCJW, Chicago North Shore. JCAST was created to educate and engage those in Chicago and surrounding communities in sex trafficking prevention. JCAST is committed to ensuring that everyone can live a free life from coercion, violence, and exploitation. JCAST falls under the leadership of NCJW Director of Violence Against Women Initiatives, Sherry Petlin. She can wave. Sherry also oversees Luggage for Freedom, Trafficked Teens, Silent Witness, and Court Watch. To learn more about these programs as well as JCAST, please visit our website at ncjwcns.org. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic shutdown. We've all suffered this past year, but as I thought about tonight's presentation, I was struck by how very dangerous this time has been for prostituted people in particular. It's a difficult idea for me to wrap my head around. It is one reason I'm looking forward to tonight's presentation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's presenters, Gail Nelson, Engagement and Development Director of JCAST, and Kathy Carmody, NCJW Life member and a JCAST Steering Committee member, and a jack of all trades. I'm adding that in.
And she's a Jill of all trades.
She's a Jill of all trades. She can do anything. And now I turn the evening over to Kathy.
Oh, great. Thanks, Debbie. The thing I hope I can do tonight is keep us on time. This is such a interesting topic and an interesting time. And we want you all to, to really have it as a lively session. I recognize some faces and names, and so I know I can welcome you, those who haven't been here before, but I can welcome some of you back. And that'll be great because we'll do a quick overview of things, but we won't spend a lot of time on the details. You can go back and look at session 1 and 2 somewhere on our website. We are now on YouTube, so you can find it there. But what I'm going to do now is start sharing my screen so that you can see what we're talking about. Gail and Melissa and Debbie and everybody, they're all going to help out with chat. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in there. You can put them to everyone. You can put them to Gail, whatever you'd like to do, because we do want this to be interactive. So sex for pay, right? Is it work? It's a topic that we don't spend a lot of time discussing in any depth whatsoever. Is it work? Is it a livelihood? Is it a form of slavery? As we said in our other 2 programs, slavery has existed in many forms over the millennia. As Jews, we know that Passover celebrates the story of the exodus from Egyptian slavery. And in the US, we fought a civil war over slavery. So we consider sex trafficking, prostitution, a modern form of slavery, and we hope that it too can be ended. It's a big wish, and what we hope we can do at JCAST is help impact that. But as you'll see tonight, there's a lot of questions regarding consent between individuals in high school, right? We've talked about that in terms of healthy relationships. When we talk about it for the situations we're going to discuss tonight. That's why it's work or pray. If we make it gray, you can't really see it. The question is, how cut and dry is this? And one of the things I think you'll find tonight is that arriving at clear answers is not always easy. This is the third of 3 virtual sessions. How many of you, a show of hands, tell me, Gail, how many people were at one of the other ones? A few? That's cool.
It looks like some few. We have a lot of people that aren't don't show that aren't on video, but it looks like there's quite a few. So we welcome you all back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And just like we said before, this can be a heavy topic. It can be a triggering topic for people. So you do what you need to do to feel comfortable, especially when we get into, I imagine everybody here has done the small group thing in Zoom, and we decided to do that tonight as well so that we can really get into some nitty-gritty of some situations. So we'll try to answer any of the questions you have as we go. And, you know, Gail and I like to have little quizzes. So it's also a good way for you to find your chat and make sure you have that handy and then you got your cursor in it. So pull up your chat, and we're going to do these quickly because we want to make sure we spend as much time as possible in the heart of the program. But at what age do you think the young woman is first trafficked? What's the average age?
We're getting some 13, some
Some of you-
14. Is it 17?
Some of you
More
guys,
13s and 14s. There's a 12.
okay. Some
Couple of 12s.
you guys are very knowledgeable. This is going to be
Yes.
fun. Well, you're right. Debatable around 30. Yes, it's 14, but give or take 6 months, right? The point is young. On the other hand, what's the average age that a man first purchases sex? Anybody remember that one?
We're getting all over the place on this one. 50, there's some 20s, there's a 30, couple of 30s.
Ah, you guys are
Times
way
in the
off.
30s. There's a 16 that came through. Some 30s and 20s. We're all over
Really?
the place on this one, Kathy.
What 16-year-old has the money for that? Anyway, so the average age is 21. Do you remember what percentage of locked out or runaway teens are trafficked within 48 hours of leaving home? So for whatever reason, they could be locked out or running away, whether in a lot of cases, the LGBTQ youth end up being locked out or run away because they're not having great relations with their family. Whatever it is, for whatever kind of person, what's the percent who's trafficked within 48 hours of leaving home?
There seems to be a lot of questions about this. We're all over the place.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a third.
It's about a third of them. So for some of you, that may seem low if you were thinking, you know, the numbers are high. For some of you, that may seem high, but that seems to be the current number that we hear about. And then there's this bonus question. So some of you, the NCJW folks, may know this. What's the name of the Jewish sex trafficking ring that brought women from Central and Eastern Europe to Buenos Aires, starting in the 1870s and going all the way to 1939 when Hitler came to power? So there were generations of Jewish sex traffickers taking girls from Central Europe to, if you read Italia Carner's book, The Third Daughter, one of the few funny lines in there was the trafficker was telling the girls that they were going to America and told them that Buenos Aires was in America. So Zvi Migdal, you can look it up. It's great history to read. It also helps you see the history of that whole time period in Europe. So we also like to try and connect things we do with NCJW because we had a book group on this. So when we do programs, we try to hook everything together. All right, so tonight, we'll make sure you know what JCAST is. Debbie mentioned that a little, so we don't have to say too much about that. We will do a sex trafficking and consent brief review, even though those other 2 programs went into more depth, just so that you have a baseline if you haven't been with us before. And then we're gonna spend the time talking about sex for pay. You know, is it work or is it pray? But we're not gonna really get into this full debate on whether prostitution should be completely legal or not. It's legal in Germany. It's partly legal, like even here in Illinois now. The trafficked women are no longer, charged with felonies. So the punishment, I guess, has been reduced a little bit. But the Norway model, which is called the equality model. So we're not going to really debate that, because what we're really focused on is helping you identify risks to people you know, and having you increase your comfort level talking about healthy relationships so that the youth don't even get anywhere near this trade. That's pretty much our focus. You can go online and see the debate about legalization or not, between here and forever. And that's really not what we're focused on. We're focused on helping you figure out how you want to think about this. Here's NCJW. We are one of the oldest faith-based women's organizations in the country, started here in 1893. I think Debbie said that that JCAS started in 2013. Primarily what we focus on is advocacy, education, and community service, and we're doing the education part tonight. Did we introduce ourselves, Gail? Should we do that? I'm Kathy Carmody. I spent most of my career in human resources and in leadership development and organization development, because I thought that the higher up people got, mostly men, of course, in management, the more they forgot how to be human beings. And so I felt like my role was to help them relearn how to be human beings. I've been a volunteer all my life, been with NCJW forever. And I'm also on the board of Between Friends, which is a domestic violence agency in Chicago. My focus is on helping women and families and bringing powerful conversations to the world. Gail.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So I've spent most of my career partnering with women and many of them have had criminal backgrounds. And what I've realized while I've partnered with them is how many of them have been caught in one way or another in sex trafficking. And that's how I began my journey learning about it. And that's why it's so important to me in creating second chances. So welcome, everybody.
So we're going to do the one minute version of what human trafficking is, where you would see that where it says the MBA of domestic violence, DV stands for domestic violence, where you would think that would be between two people, say in a house. The MBA version of this is the 99 billion with the B dollar business of human trafficking. It's only second behind, I think guns and drugs were tied, right, Gail, or something like that. And next on the list is human trafficking, and it's a big business. The perspective that we have is that sex trafficking, prostitution, is commercialized domestic violence. And so in our lengthier presentations, we show a 1 minute video from Polaris that overviews how sex trafficking operates in like 25 different businesses, all the way from hotels to hospitality to construction. So we want you to understand that this is about business and power, much more than sex. So from the sort of federal legal definition, it's about the recruitment and transportation of persons by force, fraud, or coercion. And the force is definitely force. So we tend to think about people being whisked off the street. You see that like in the movies, right? And that is definitely an issue. That's not really the predominant source, shall we say, of the people who are prostituted. Fraud is a huge source, and so is coercion. And both of them are, if the person is under 18, it's automatically a bad thing and automatically going to be problematic. But once we get to the 18 age, that's where we start having the conversations around, gee, is this person doing this willingly? Is there consent? So if the victim's under 18, there's no need to show any of these three things, because it's automatic if basically the person is a child under 18. And the main point is it's for economic exploitation. That's where the dollars come from. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's a transaction. So in the other sessions, we showed lots of statistics and things. What we're going to show now is a sort of a one-sentence view that every day between 16 and 25,000, mostly females, including those from the LGBT community, the isolated, prior abuse victims, these folks are sold to mostly men who purchase on average twice a month. They have some college education. But what's really key here is that almost half of them have been lured and groomed by someone they know into providing sex. So we tend to think of this as an anonymous issue. This is not an anonymous issue. This can be anything, and when you read the stories, this can be anything from being done in your own house. So we taught a lot of the definition is around across borders. That's not really necessary. It can be done here in Chicago. An uncle can do his niece or whatever, right? So it's often by someone they know. We talked in the prior sessions about Jeffrey Epstein and Michael Jackson, and you have examples of well-known cases. So let's get to the part about trafficking versus sex work. And I put that in quotes because in some ways this is really about definitions, right? Here's some things to consider as we go through this. What is work? When we think about work, we tend to think of it as, well, you're choosing your place of employment, your location, you got benefits, right? Sometimes you can say no to a project. I don't know, in sex work, do you have that kind of freedom? So in trafficking, there's definitely a lack of consent. There's no financial benefit. And yet on the sex work side, if people are voluntarily doing this, and I went, actually Sherry and I were in a webinar today, and one of the speakers had been, I think she had been prostituted for like 8 years before she got out of the trade. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry, but she said, yes, there are people who do this willingly. So there are a few of those. And even those folks can be trafficked. And then the question becomes, well, is that a human rights violation? So there's lots of things to talk about in relation to sex as work. But for the person being purchased, is it really work? I've heard the line, it's not sex, it's not work, it's big business. But do other jobs have such trauma engaged in them, physical, emotional, mental? And is this consensual in terms of mutually satisfying sex, which we sort of talked about in our prior programs when we talked about healthy relationships? Is freedom being limited? These are things for you to think about as we go through the situations tonight. And yet for the buyer, the purchaser, who are mostly men, why are they purchasing? Do they know where the money goes when they give the money? And really, do they even care? Do they have a responsibility to ask? And then for me, it's really interesting to think about as we talk to men who say, hey, if I take a woman out for dinner and I exchange some goods and services and she gives me sex, what's wrong with that? That how do they understand the mental and physical trauma of prostitution, if they even think about it at all? So we tend not to think about things that we can't see. And so calling it work is really normalizing the sex trade. And, for us, it's a big business. So one of the things that we've said every time in these programs, we're not trying to foist our values on you. We want you to figure out what your values are and what you want to share with your children and grandchildren. But for us, this is a sex trade, and we don't believe that people should be sold like sacks of potatoes. So that's where we come down on that. Tonight, what we're going to do is hopefully help you identify some of the issues in sex trafficking and decide, as well as the issues in the relationships and in the stories that we'll read, so that you can decide your position or your positions on them, and then give you a chance to figure out how you're going to speak about some of these things, because that's what partly you'll do in the small group. So here's what we're going to do. So be prepared, guys. You're actually going to participate tonight. It's not just listening. Get your water handy. I got my Cardinals mug here for all of you Cub fans, you know, so be prepared. So those of you who were here before, you may remember that we used the story of Maggie from Highland Park last time. We're going to use that as a group example. We're going to go through that. I think Debbie volunteered to read because Gail and I know it so well that we think we might read it not very well. So then we'll discuss that, and we'll put you into some small groups randomly and give you a situation which should eventually come up as a link in your chat so that you can go there. And we'll share you that in a minute. And then we'll come back. We'll give you about 10 or 12 minutes in that room. And then we'll come back as a group and debrief some of these things and figure out what's working for you, what's not, what questions you have. And then we'll have some final thoughts on discussing relationships and consent. But before we do that, I don't know if you remember I think it was last time we talked about the power and control wheels, which don't worry about if you can't see this, because each page that you have in your room will have the one on the left on it. What we want you to basically look at is categories and make some distinctions around different types of power and control issues so that when you are talking with colleagues, friends, family about these issues, you will have some of them pop up in your head and you'll be able to articulate them better. So that's the one on the left is pretty standard. The one in the middle is called teen power and control. We spent a lot of time talking about, of course, working with youth. So this wheel would be one that could be used for like junior and high school students, because it's, for instance, the whole economic abuse piece is really not on there. They don't have a lot of cars and money and houses and children. And so they adapt this to the lives of teens. The other interesting piece around this is now you're seeing more what they're calling an equity wheel, so that it's not so negative, that in a sense, it's a way to talk positively about what you want positively in relationships. And if you look on the left where it says using privilege, one of the things we're going to also talk about tonight, or hint at anyway, is how the language has been changing. Where it says using privilege, the early models of this used to call using male privilege. And then the world said, wait a minute, men aren't the only ones here. LGBTQ folks are involved in all of this. So now it's using privilege. And if you look at the middle one for the teens, it's also using social status. I mean, what do you want more in high school than to be, sort of top brass, right? Or top of the heap. So status is very important. And status then is an area of power and control that can be used as well. So it's just to help give you a sense of categories, as well as to know that the language is constantly being updated and changed. And so even in, heterosexual relationships, the women exert control. I remember one time when I was working the crisis line. I'm 40-hour trained, so I can work the crisis line at the agency. And I did have, there were men who would call. They would be gay, but they would also be in marriages with women who were abusing them. So you kind of got to be prepared for everything. All right, Debbie, what we're going to do now is, if you remember your traffic teens, these are true stories. Debbie's going to read it out loud so you can follow along or listen. And then we're going to sort of discuss this as a group. We'll see if we can do it. I can't see how many of us there are. So maybe Gail or somebody can tell us whether or not we do it verbally or in the chat, but we'll ask you the questions that you're going to use when you break out into the rooms. So go ahead, Deb.
Okay. Maggie, age 16, from Highland Park, Illinois. Maggie met Brock, a boy from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the local mall. For several weeks, Maggie and Brock exchanged text messages and eventually started dating. Maggie adored Brock and introduced him to her parents. They adored him too. Brock invited Maggie to Milwaukee to meet his parents. When Maggie arrived, Brock picked her up and suggested they go to his favorite restaurant for dinner. The restaurant turned out to be a dancing bar owned by Brock's friend. Brock invited Maggie to dance and then showed her to a private room. Brock convinced Maggie she was choosing to have sex with her bar guests because it made Brock happy. That night, Maggie lost track of the number of men she had sex with.
All right. Is this trafficking, you guys? Let me see a show of hands. How many of you think this is trafficking? Or put a hand in the chat or whatever. And maybe you want to enter in the chat why or why not if you think it's trafficking.
Tricked?
Or do we want to maybe unmute yourself and somebody can talk? I think we're doing okay for a minute or so, right, Gail? So the first question you're going to answer is.
So I'm hearing that she was coerced. She was tricked into doing it. There's a lot of people on the belief it was coercion.
Okay, that's cool.
And she was lured into the environment where she had no control.
So what are more, the next question is what signs of vulnerability stand out to you? What more signs did you see? So for example, it sounds like you think she did not consent. What information do you wish she had had? And also what surprises you about this situation?
So Kathy, let me back up quickly and just note Maggie's age.
Yeah,
Maggie's 16. So when young people are under 18, we don't have to prove the force, fraud, or coercion, right? Because it's statutory rape. So for the first point, we can just talk about the fact that once there was any type of sex then it was trafficking, right? But then let's push the age a little bit so that Maggie's 19, and then we would go back to the need to prove the force, fraud, and coercion. Go ahead, Kathy. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, that's not interrupting. That I want you to say that and keep going. So, good. Somebody's asking how old was Brock. Okay. What other questions are you guys noticing?
So I like Amy. He got her to trust him, and then he pimped her out.
Right? Over time. Now, of course, we don't know how much time right? But the point is, remember we talked about almost half of the victims and survivors know their trafficker. So, I mean, heck, her parents met him, right? So what makes your antenna go up? What would make your antenna go up as a parent? Okay, so somebody's saying, yeah, why? That's the point. Why didn't she say, hey, I'm out of here? Like the people are saying about Governor Cuomo, right? Some are going, hey, get your hand off my back. So the point is, some people do and some people don't. And part of the purpose of these 3 sessions is to give you the courage to teach your children to say, hey, if your antenna go up about something not being right, you need to say something, and giving them some language and some ways to get out of this so that this doesn't happen to them. All right, other questions or comments? Because what we want to do now is put you into groups of, I guess 4 is probably what we're going to do. Then you can talk more that way. And you're going to, I think he put something in a drink. Yeah, yeah, sure. The drug and the addiction is exactly one way that it gets carried out. So we'll talk about that. We'll keep going. You'll see some different examples and we'll come back together. I guess Gail's going to put the link in the chat. Melissa's going to work on getting everybody into a room randomly. You're either going to be in a Rachel room, a Daniel room, a Mackenzie, or a Steve room. Feel free to introduce yourselves because, most people like to know who they're talking with and where you live. Click on that link, choose the file, choose the page that corresponds to the name of your group. The worst part of these things is somebody's got to be a spokesperson, right? So find a spokesperson, read the situation, read it aloud if you need to, and then discuss the questions that are the in the box on the page. We'll give you about 10 minutes to do this. We'll give you a 2-minute warning. All right, everybody's back.
Everyone's coming back. Great to see everybody. All right. Should we start with Rachel then, or?
Well, let's go back here and debrief that a little bit. So if you were a spokesperson or you want to share something from your group, there were what, 2 Rachels and everything else was a 1? So who was a Rachel, and who would you like to, most people may have had a chance to read the stories, but if not, you can just give an overview or of why you made your decision. So who was a Rachel, and who would be willing to share?
So Kathy, you're going to move it down to the slide so people can see the situation, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I have to admit, in our group on Rachel, we were just beginning chit-chatting about it and didn't even get to decide who would to speak. So
just put your ideas in the chat, or
Okay.
tell us what you thought.
Yeah, so everybody, so then, feel free to put things in the chat if you like. That's fine too.
Well, we were the other Rachel, and we got through it for a little bit. So she was a 16-year-old girl, so we decided that yes, this was sex trafficking, just due to the fact that she was 16, and she made herself vulnerable by sexting pictures to her boyfriend, who then, after they broke up or had a fight or got angry with one another or something, he then shared them with other people, which caused her to be vulnerable. And then this other person came along, and James, and acted as he was her friend and wound up pimping her out too. So she was, I think she was, she did not, was not necessarily consensual, because he just kind of forced it all upon her. And then we started talking about how the sexting is becoming a norm for online dating, which surprised me.
Yeah, any other things that anybody
That's
wants
about
to?
all we had.
That's great, though. What surprised you guys about the situation? Anything?
I was surprised at the lack of social support she had from healthy role models. So I thought less about her engaging in the sexting and more in the lack of attention she was receiving, which isn't always unhealthy attention. Simply sexting is just a means of asking for attention when you don't really know the most appropriate way to do so.
Great.
that was true.
Anybody else?
We didn't say this, but I'm also struck by her loss of voice, that she wasn't comfortable with it, but didn't apparently know how to use her voice to say no.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's great. That,
Yeah.
boy, that's exactly what we want to talk about and learn how to teach how to have a voice and how to say no. That's great.
Carol Gilligan's work.
Yeah, and did the men get arrested? Well, we don't know. We do know that most men don't get arrested, right? Tom Dart does a great job as he can with the resources he has in Cook County and around the country to do sex trafficking stings, but we have a long way to go in that.
I love what Amy wrote here. Once she felt humiliated, she was more vulnerable to being taken advantage of. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Amy said. I think it's so easy for women to feel shamed, I mean, yeah, so he shared those pictures, but once she felt so shamed, and as Abigail mentioned, just didn't have a lot of support. And I don't know what started. I mean, I think there's lots of messages that women get, period, that, okay, once you're shamed, you're already damaged goods. You might as well just, there's no redemption for you. This is the life you have to lead now. So
One of the things that the teen wheel talks about is, of course, how much teens want to feel want to feel a part of something, right? And how for some having a boyfriend is a way of showing that they are fit in. And so you think about in this one how, you know, she couldn't imagine a life without James because he was so supportive of her, and so then he was able to take advantage of her.
All right, let's go on to the next one. You can always make comments later as well when we summarize. So, whoops, where's my? There we go. Who was in a Mackenzie room?
You skipped Daniel, Kathy.
Oh, there, I went too fast. Okay, who was a Daniel?
We were Daniels. So I'll just start speaking and anybody from my group jump in, please. You know, we obviously we agreed that this is trafficking. Both boys are 15 years old. So definitely trafficking. And, you know, we questioned, you know, if Seth, who is the one who lured Daniel into providing sex, if Seth was part of a sort of a pyramid or a ladder where Seth had to answer to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else up that food chain. You know, if, you know, Seth was collecting money from Daniel, a percentage from Daniel, and then that was one of our questions, you know, where does it end? And the other observation that we made with Daniel, the victim, living in several different foster care facilities, that he was vulnerable in a lot of different ways, probably because of, you know, lack of staff in being able to monitor and engage with the children there. Also, lack of training and awareness in how to even look for signs among those residents. And, you know, we know that there's always going to be ways for a child to sneak out, find a way to, you know, do that. But I think you get to the heart of why that happens is because of a lack of training.
Great. Any other comments or thoughts from anybody in the Daniel group?
So here's an interesting question from Jill, and it kind of connected to my question was, what would everyone feel differently if Daniel was not 15 but 19? And and it kind of connects to what Jill says was if Daniel didn't have to pay Seth, do we think he would be sex trafficking or two boys with street smarts?
Yeah, this is where it's gray, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially if both boys are 19. So it's things to think about. Okay, Daniel, I think Mackenzie is next, right? Who was in the Mackenzie? Yeah, foster care is a nightmare for sure. A lot of these youth come out of foster care and that whole system, unfortunately. Is anybody from a Mackenzie group want to share their thoughts? Do we know who was in the Mackenzie group? Are they still on?
Oh, yes, I was one of the.
Go ahead,
people in the
Meredith.
group.
Great, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead,
my, okay.
Joanna Meredith.
All right, feel free to jump on in here with me. Is this trafficking? Yes. Right, we were in agreement right away, without a doubt.
Because
He's
Oh, were you opening it? Sorry.
What made it trafficking
we-
for you?
Oh, well, immediately, like with the idea of how it began to escalate, and that power and control. And even if she freely decided to say, okay, I'm going to check this out. I trust you. I'm going to go check out this job. And then she was like, oh, I'm feeling good. I made the money because of that financial challenge, which made her vulnerable. It then very, very quickly turned. Because I mean, even, the way that the language is, expected to dance, but then demanded. And for us, that escalation of violence and the power and control that creates was just another added layer. So it very quickly became apparent to us that it was definitely trafficking.
So
And
Gail,
please, other people chime in with me, help me out here.
Yeah, so I mean, she was really vulnerable. She needed money and wanted to please him, wanted to please her. And so she was in a bad state, and he gave her an opportunity to make money. And it escalated. He provided her a home and a job, but then he manipulated her by making her do these things that she didn't really, she also didn't know how to say no. She got totally caught up in it and lost her independence, and it just got into a vicious cycle.
if she's,
I mean, very well said. She had lost her independence. She would have lost her home. And then she essentially, was working for him or, his associates. So just all of that power and control, it just quickly, I mean, even the violence upon her family. I mean,
some people might ask, she's 20 years old, why doesn't she just walk away?
And she came back, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think mental manipulation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And I
mean,
think
she was
that-
hooked,
Go ahead.
totally.
I know. And I always remind myself when why didn't she walk away? And I remind myself, why, let's flip it. And, why did he take advantage of her? Why did he choke her until she blacked out? And so it's that piece of that psychological, that hidden, that invisible, just that effect on you is, we can see that even in us wondering, why didn't she walk away? And after the incident, she did run away.
And it also gets to what we can talk about a little bit as well, which is we always ask why they don't run away, when in fact, what we could also be asking is, why don't we teach men not to do this? Right? And that this is not appropriate.
So
And-
Amy has her hand up. Go ahead, Amy.
There's a foreign movie that I saw, and now I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure it's on Netflix. But where a girl becomes close with a guy, they're living together, but he gets to know her mother and her little sister, and knows their financial situation and knows the age and all of that stuff, so that when he takes his girlfriend and starts trafficking her, the threat is always the hurting her mother and her sister, not so much hurting her. So I mean, that seems to be something that comes up over and over again, where they know so much about you. They know where those people live. They know how old they are. They know where they work.
That's the cycle, right? That's the in domestic violence circles, it's called the cycle of violence, right? And it's very hard to break out of that cycle.
And
So
the
if you look-
question, of course, is where does she go to, since she was living with him too? So it's the question of where does she go?
but if you go to Steve, because we've only got we can stay on a little bit if you want to keep going out. I want to do Steve in a minute and then really finish the program but we can stay and talk if you'd like. But who was in the Steve group and what are your thoughts about Steve?
I was in the Steve group. We didn't think this was trafficking, but we did think it was exploitation, intimidation, and financial and economic abuse. In a sense, it might have been, and we didn't say this in the group, but it could have been labor trafficking because Alex pressured to get the job at Target and to deposit the checks to his account. So it wasn't sex trafficking, but it could have been labor trafficking.
Good job, you guys. It was sort of it wasn't really a trick, but the point was to help you think about what's the difference and that occurs as well. And it's about, partner relations and how do you get out of these things? And how do you help people? How would you, if you were, the parents, how would you help Steve get out of this situation? Assuming Steve would even tell you, right?
Right.
And how as a parent, how do you ask questions to find out what's going on in these situations? So Mary, that was terrific. So I'm gonna rush through the end if that's okay with you. We can come back and talk about these. But as we said, it's not as clear as it sounds, is it? You notice that. Is it force? Is it fraud? Is it coercion? Is it consensual? You guys noticed a lot of the signs that are important to pay attention to. And it makes me wonder, has your opinion of paid sex work or prostitution changed at all as a result of either tonight or the sessions that you attended? Because we tend to blame the trafficked. Whom do you blame for this, right? Well, is it really an issue of blaming, or is it about a system where gender-based violence exists in our system for taking advantage of other people? So this is kind of where you come in. What we want in the education portion, of course, is to help change the conversation around the demand for paid sex. So if you think about relationships you're witnessing currently, do your antenna go up about anything? How eager are you to discuss consent and healthy relationships now with youth? I mean, you may be absolutely terrified after 3 sessions of this, and that's okay. But I got to tell you, we've been having some great feedback. We had an email from somebody who's actually an educator who said, I think it was the last session, that she had the courage to sit down with her 20-year-old son and have a conversation that she really didn't think she was going to have. And so that makes, for Gail and me and those of us in JCAS, that makes all of this worthwhile. If we can help, anybody have the courage to shift the conversation and to help young people have what you all called their own voice, which is really, to me, kind of what life is all about, right? Then, I mean, we're ecstatic about that.
So Kathy, let me jump in. Amy's got her hand up. Go ahead, Amy.
Is there any sex work that is like legal and consensual, like where you're over 21 or over 18, you don't have a pimp? Like, are there people who, I don't know whether they're call girls or they do this video stuff or whatever, and they get paid? Is any of that, 1, legal, and 2, not trafficking?
I think that's the question, Amy. That's what we're leaving you with here today. It is that it's all very gray, and we can put all those different conditions in, but I think from what we were trying to show with those situations is those conditions change or they're very gray, and so we would argue that it may not be so easy to identify what it really is consensual, and more importantly, it's not really on us to identify that. It's on all of you to think about what you want to tell the young people in your lives about that.
And the question is, why do they have to go there to do that? Well, you know, if there were economically viable alternatives for these women to survive without having to do that, most of them probably would not choose to do that, is right, is my guess. So, but yes, I mean, you know, in Germany, you know, that's why I said, we don't want to do the whole legal, non-legal debate. Let's finish the slides. And then if you want to stay on, we can talk about that. But there, you know, there's pros and cons to both. But I think for us in talking about, oh, Sherry had a discussion with her grandson. Cool. That the way I kind of look at this, and we kind of look at these discussions is a little bit like this goldfinch I took a picture of last summer, trying to get the seeds in the garden. When you're talking to your youth about this, it's like, you know, how do you get upside down and still not fall, right? Because this is for some people such an awkward conversation. So it's the kind of thing where we still want children to grow, right? We want them firmly grounded, and we want them to plant and develop their wings and fly away, but we want them to do it safely. And so when you have these kinds of discussions, what are you trying to do? Are you just acknowledging that they're curious about sex? You know, if they're young, that's an age appropriate thing to talk about. You want to have ongoing discussions. Commitment versus control. One of the things that a lot of people find is engaging with commitment is much more effective than trying to control young people. Who was it that said, you know, kids are going to get out anyway? So you want to try and find another way to communicate. So what we're talking about is modeling positive language for interpersonal relationships, building your trust, and letting them know that you are there for them, and hoping that they know how to, you know, come to you when they need to. And then real quickly, there is progress being made. Backpage, which was the biggest site online, was taken down in 2018, was the biggest prostitution site. And even in December, Pornhub, which is a huge site for pornography, took down 10 million videos that were unverified. And that was because Nick Kristof wrote an article in the New York Times about this. So there are a lot of people paying a lot of attention to this. And as we talked about earlier, it's also about language. When the organizations who are able to sort of what they call the off-ramp for the girls, the first thing that they learn is they are not prostitutes. They were being prostituted. So they're trying to even help shift their own mental image about themselves. And so language is also very important. But we still have this paradox, right? Men can buy, but women can't sell. That's still the kind of legal limbo we're in. So there's a site there that you can learn more about for partial decriminalization. It's a very thorny, upside down issue. And what we want to do is we can't solve that, but we can hope that over the 3 sessions this winter, we've given you some ways to think about how to have these conversations, and that we really helped give you some information about trafficking. We pointed you to some issues regarding vulnerability. You all were very observant about that, and that we help you build courage to have conversations that matter. So, you know, we really thank you for participating, and feel free to ask some questions. Women can't sell. Women are by far arrested more for prostitution than men are for soliciting. And so that's what we mean by that is it's a cultural thing, right? That women are not supposed to be doing this, but it's okay for the men to buy. So stick in the chat what you thought about tonight's session or the 3 sessions, while we also share with you that, which we didn't know when we started this, was that Mary Bonnet, who I don't know if she's on tonight, but she's the playwright, and we're going to have an event, a performance, where part of her 15-minute monologue from one of her plays called Monger. She writes a lot about sex trafficking and domestic violence is going to be performed by Jamise Wright, who I think is in that picture. She's an artistic associate at Her Story Theater, and she is the lead in the original, was the lead in the original manga production. And then after the performance, Mary and the panelists are going to explore the impact of men's participation in domestic sex trafficking and how it affects, you know, lives and families. And so be prepared, because this will also contain adult content and mature themes. So thank you so much. We're happy to stay on if you have questions or comments. And then I think there's a poll. We'd love to, especially for you NCJW members, we just want to find out how you want to proceed moving forward. So thanks so much for your participation and your questions, y'all.